We welcome you to HAI at Work. Today's topic is using virtual reality to design the future of flight. There's some pretty cool technology available for aircraft and component design, and the people at Bell are going to show us how they are using virtual reality to speed up some of their processes. So first of all, as always, let me introduce our speakers today. First of all, as always, James Viola, our President and CEO of HAI. We have Levi Bilbrey, who is Creative Design Manager at Bell. He's managed the branding and creative efforts at Bell for 3 years. He led Bell's 2018 rebranding efforts and has directed several aircraft concepts, including Bell's FCX and the Bell Nexus. One of the problems we're having today is Cam Ayres is on the road and is joining us via phone. We're hoping that we can get him in. He is an innovation engineering specialist with Bell. He holds a master's in arts and technology, focuses on simulated environments, virtual reality, and creative direction. He's worked as a creative lead and technical strategist for companies such as, sorry, I'm missing part of that. American Airlines, IBM, the US Army, and Textron. And as an innovation engineering specialist, Cam oversees the future flight controls and consults on implementation of emerging technologies. As always, we're going to invite people to ask questions during the webinar. In the GoToWebinar module, there is a port labeled questions. We invite you to submit the questions via writing, and we will address all of the questions at the end of the webinar. Also, if you missed something today or would like to review the video again or the webinar again, you will receive a video link tomorrow. Sometimes it's available sooner, but due to the high volume of GoToWebinars right now around the world, it's been taking a little extra time. We appreciate your patience with that. Now I'd like to introduce Jim Viola, our president and HAI CEO. Jim?
All right, thanks, Dan. Thanks for all you have joined us again today. It's a great opportunity to reach out and share some more information about the helicopter and rotorcraft community and what's going on. I know everybody right now, things are starting to open back up after the pandemic. Hopefully people are plans on how we're gonna pick up where things were kind of put on hold in the middle of March. And I know here at HAI, we got a lot of things going on. It's that time of the year where we're doing renewals for both individuals as well as companies. So look forward to getting those renewals. We're also just opened up for Heli Expo 2021. I know it seems like it's right around the corner. We just came out of Anaheim and now we're going to New Orleans. New Orleans should be good. The good news is I know people are looking forward to that because right off the bat, as soon as that opened up, we started getting our reservations for floor space down there. So thank you very much, the great supporters. And then today, we've got a big supporter here, which is Bell. And Bell is going to show us, some of the new things that are out there when it comes to engineering and design. And that's a great topic for today. When helicopters started off, many, many years ago, and you had to do stuff, back on the drawing board and tables and all that stuff. And now with virtual reality, just like we're all here virtually today, they're going to show how they've done that stuff now. And not only do they do it with all on computers, but then you got the virtual reality of being able to see how well it works. And so with that, I wish I had some of the titles like these two gentlemen today that are presenting, creative design manager, and then the other one is innovation engineer. I mean, so with those titles, and you heard the background from Dan, I'm really looking forward to today's information coming out on the webinar. So thank you very much for joining us, and without further ado, over to Levi.
And Levi, we're not hearing you right now. There we go.
Okay, what about now?
Yep, we can hear you. If you just touch the screen, you should be able to advance the slides.
All right, terrific. Thank you. And thanks, Jim, for that intro. You actually you teed it up perfectly because really the first thing you said is the first thing that we're going to talk about, because in a world where we're in virtual now, folks like Cameron and I have been living in the virtual space for quite a long time here. So and to kick it off with that, really, that's where we are. So traditionally, Jim's exactly right. From the drafting boards and the drawing boards to the computer aided design. The technology has advanced over the years, greatly. I grew up son of an engineer in the oil and gas space, so I got to see CAD design late 70s through the 80s and 90s, and that was always exciting to me to watch computer aided design take off. And then now that we can actually put a headset on and essentially virtually touch these designs, it's a pretty exciting time. So with that, I think we'll see if I can advance these slides here. Dan, you may have to do it for me. Oh, there we go. So where we started off with this is we had a vision early on as the innovation engineering team and the creative design team, along with our executive leadership, that there's more than we could do in the concept design space. We see it with automotive all the time. It's a really important step and stage in the process to be able to visualize, whether digitally or physically, visualize the future of the design process, of the products, of the technologies. And what we really wanted to do with the FCX1 concept is to create a visual roadmap. So the aircraft industry isn't really used to these very public concept design pieces like we did back in 2017 and with the FCX1 concept. And then since then, we've done it the last 2 years, and this was the third year really with the Bell Nexus air taxi aircraft. So where our groups come in, and it's really a collaboration between engineering and creative, is still, just like Jim said, it's still, we start with sketches. What's important here is that with the sketch phase, we're really trying to get some thoughts down on paper based on whether it's a technological advancement for an aircraft or something that we've heard from a customer or a passenger, or some big leaps forward from the engineering team. What we're trying to do is create some ways to visualize that. So the easiest way to do that is a rapid sketching. It's a tried and true method from industrial design, and it's no different from how we start here before we even get into the VR or the AR space. So we do hundreds of these. We put them in front of lots of different folks. We like to get lots of different perspectives. And what's important from there is that we then are able to move over and start putting things from the sketches with that into the 3D space. So I think that's where there we go. Might go to the next slide. And you see Cameron here in this image along with the pilot. So once we've got a sketched out piece where we're kind of understanding some of the aesthetics and some of the physics and the aerodynamics that we're starting to play with, again at a really rough stage, we can then start modeling those out in a 3D design software space that's really made for virtual reality. And then from there we can do human factors, pilot visibility. We check head impact clearance. They have the ability to say that, maybe this is a bit too close or a bit too far, or I have trouble seeing through, this particular area. Things you never really could do in the early stages from sketch and sort of the death by PowerPoint type of thing that folks were used to in the early days there with just trying to talk about KPIs and the things we're going for aircraft design. Here we're able to jump right into a physical space and look around and actually move these elements around the person real time, which that's been that big leap forward, because some of that stuff you couldn't tell until you built a physical mock-up to sit in, or a cardboard or a foam or a plywood type of space to really get that 3D awareness. Here we're able to do that really, really rapidly and then advance the design around the person. You can go to the next slide. There we go. So another cool thing we did, 3-4 years ago was really lean in from a creative aesthetic design and an engineering, functional design, which, Bell's no stranger to. We've been innovating and designing aircraft for 85 years. Actually, this year is the 85th anniversary of the company. And so as far as knowing how to make things fly, Bell's been wildly successful in the past and really leading in a lot of those spaces. So we got that part down. Where we always can improve is the passenger experience, the pilot experience, and the customer experience at shows like HAI and other places we take these things to. And then also the rapid advancement using the technology to move these things faster in the design process. So now what we've got is a marriage between form and function. It's no longer prioritizing one over the other. Function and safety and reliability is always table stakes. But now bringing creative into that conversation, we're able to, make some of these very visually compelling and sometimes easier to use. We consider things like ingress and egress. But with this type of dynamic always comes, its own challenges. So what we've really encouraged here is a cross-collaborative functional team that is encouraged to challenge each other. So it's a lot of back and forth. It's a lot of disagreement and on purpose. So we actually like those times where we disagree because then we can dive in and figure out, what's going on with the particular issue. So if we go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about, and it's one of my favorite charts here, that is really talking about the left brain and the right brain side of the equation. And I love this graphic. It's not one of ours. It's one that I found and I love to use. That people traditionally think, engineers, they're left brain, they're very analytical, mathematical, and very scientific. And the creatives tend to be very touchy-feely. They like colors, they use feelings, they use emotions, which we love that dynamic between the two. But I would argue that what we've done is actually created a holistic brain out of these two teams. So we get great perspectives from both sides. And what we found over time is that the engineers really start to think more creatively, and our creative artistic folks start to really understand the physics, the aerodynamics, some of those other pieces that are really important for the functionality and the safety of the aircraft. So what's been really nice is to see each group kind of move over and exercise the other part of the brain that maybe is not part of their daily routine. So we've had some great success with that. Now the other part of that, and if you go to the next slide, is another funny example, but a lot of times what that creates is an interesting back and forth. And when we have leadership come into the room or we're pitching to somebody, what they would describe it as is a game of ping pong, right? Or like watching a tennis match. So the engineers would throw something out, and we would ask more questions about that and throw it back over, and then we would suggest something very creative and they would say no. So it was a lot of this back and forth across the room, but all of that was intended to get to kind of the core of the issue and to really challenge each side of the table to push it further. So if you go to the next slide, one of the really important questions, and you may have to click here a couple times, Dan, to get it to come up, is that we really wanted to ask hard questions, right? So it wasn't a take no for an answer. We would ask why. So part of that was the education. And that's what allowed those engineers to become more creative, because we would ask, why isn't this the way we do things now, or why shouldn't we do it that way? So why and why not is the other part of this slide that'll come up. That that was the core, and that was my job. I was in the room to ask why, to kind of play the uneducated engineer in the room that says, well, tell me more about this, and we're going to explore that. And as we peeled the onion layers away, we started to find some really collaborative strengths on both sides of the table. So going back into the design, so if we advance the slide again here, it's really going back to those sketches, right? So you do a lot of that back and forth. You get to a core sketch, and you get the buy-in from all the right folks that says, this is the one we're going to go make. So keep advancing the slides here, and I'll talk quickly through what that process looks like, because you go from a sketch to 3D. We're able to play with a lot of different visuals in 3D. I can't tell you how many times we did the gear, the rotor blades. We tried and tested all of that stuff beyond the sketch and the 3D and put it into a virtual reality environment to allow our executives and our engineers and some customers even to walk around physically the aircraft. Because the whole goal here was to eventually build this full-scale mock-up physically in a show space. So if we keep going through the next few slides, that process is really important to visualize what the aircraft might be if it were real, but to keep going into, okay, we've got to build something that folks can climb in and around, which is very different than building a helicopter. You're not going to see this amount of steel and other stuff. So we got to get into the fabrication piece as well. And so the same team of engineers and creatives, we went to the fabrication shop, started working directly with the fabricators, the welders, the seats, the materials, right down to the stitching. What's it going to be like to have this in a HAI show booth, to have people climb all around it, to have it be durable, to last multiple shows, multiple years, but also be able to showcase those creative aesthetics and those engineering technology capabilities. So a lot of effort went into the physical design as well, but it was all rapidly advanced by having things in that sort of digital twin environment to begin with. So a few more slides here just show that build process. And this also, the fabricators loved it as well, because we went in there with a lot of visualization to say this is what it needs to look like when we're done. So this was a fantastic project. It was every time I tell the story, folks are, they say similar things to what Jim said. It's the coolest job or the most fun experience, and it really taught us a lot, though. And as Cameron's going to get into here in just a second, the ways to keep advancing and keep pushing and keep challenging the internal teams, because you get to a gorgeous finished project like this, our product here, and on the show floor, we're able to let folks into this, to sit in the seats, to really experience. In this case, it was an AR, pilot interface, and there was a passenger interface as well. So we didn't just stop with the aesthetic design of the aircraft. We were also able to come in and create some really nice heads-up display visuals, which we'll show here shortly. And it's all part of that pushing through AR and VR into the design process. And then out comes some of the marketing materials as well. So if we keep advancing the slides here, I think we'll see one or two other pieces of it at the show floor, HAI 2017. Right there amongst, real today flying aircraft, we have a very futuristic type of concept, but we did this to really be able to walk around the aircraft physically, and then with the augmented reality and some of the other virtual reality experiences to talk through, how some of these technologies might come to bear in the future. So that was a great sort of piece. We've actually done a couple of case studies with this, with HTC Vive and a couple of other folks. Sector 5 Digital was another agency partner in building some of these experiences. So that case study can be found online as well. So when we talk about, and if we go to the next slide, I think it's sort of teeing up a conversation about, what is the ROI on this for the business side? Well, it's really about the speed to get to some sort of a visual product that you can sell the idea of, instead of having to go out and start building and testing these physical environments. You can really do that much more rapidly using virtual reality to do that engineering design. And finding ways, like Cameron's about to talk to next, is moving things from the CAD world that the engineers work in into a virtual platform, which a lot of folks are really trying to do right now. It's still kind of in its infancy, from my opinion. But getting to that space where the engineering design can start to be, rapidly advanced, just like we do in the 3D environment, like in game engines and things like that. So the ROI for the business really is being able to show things faster, show things more often, make rapid advancements and changes, pitch multiple ideas instead of having to really develop one very deeply, and then get to a space where we can then share a lot of visuals over to guide the physical interaction and the virtual interaction with our audiences. And then I'll throw it over to Cam. Hopefully we can hear him now, so we're about to find out, and go ahead and advance to the slide here.
Any luck?
I hear you.
Okay, all right. So if that's coming through all right, I am not going to move my car an inch further here in Mississippi. And I'll just keep talking. If I cut out, Levi, feel free to take over for me. But we wanted to touch on how we deployed that after the design is done. It's on the show floor out at Heli Expo. How did we leverage interactive technology to further tell that story? So we use all of these emerging technologies to design, but then we also want to use them to show you how you can experience it. So we can go to that next slide right after this one. And this is actually on the show floor. And this is an example of how we leverage augmented reality and had a passenger in the back. So we had multiple people inside the actual fuselage here, each of them experiencing what it might be like to be a passenger, viewing things like augmented emails, music that you can watch, live traffic updates, and things like that. And then in our next slide, we had a pilot experience where if you sat in the front seat, you'll notice something missing here, which is all of those heavy avionics and gauges that normally sit in the front of an aircraft. So this is telling that future story of what we think we're going to be able to do in the future of allowing the pilot to customize their HUD and their user interface and move gauges and maps around to whatever your personal preference might be at that time, and do away with a lot of these hardware kind of stuck in their ways, older technology. And then further on that, on this next slide, we have some virtual reality that we were deploying. So on the left here, you'll see we had 4 different VR experiences where you could fly in a commercial aircraft, really any of them, as well as the FCX. And on the right there, it was an interactive timeline. So right there, you see the timeline, and that was just going through the last 85 years of the rich history of Bell, whether it's videos, news articles, whatever it might be, so that you could experience what that's been. And we can hop on to the next one. So as Levi alluded to, the road to this had a lot of complications, and I feel like Levi did a great job talking through engineering and creative working together, but also the technical complications of just the base file format. So it definitely ended up not being an easy road on that front either. And on this next slide, you'll see what I'm sure many in the audience have seen before, which is a CATIA model or a CAD model. And really the whole basis for these types of models is it's all mathematically driven surface data. So this is very much built for something that's going to be tooled at some point or actually machined out. It all needs to work with how physics works in reality. And it's very much built in one specific way. Whereas on the next slide, you'll see a gremlin that I thought was fun to throw in the slide just to illustrate kind of where I come from, which is more the animation game design world. And the process here is so much more akin to sculpting, and it's about creating something that aesthetically gets your point across, that it's all built in what's called polygonal mesh, which almost has no basis in this surface data, this mathematically created data, and it's a completely separate way of generating these 3D models. So trying to get those to talk to each other, I think we found some good pipelines internally that we can use now, but it still comes through on the polygonal mesh side very, very dense, which brings us to our next slide of how we eventually deploy this is in the game design world. So you'll see a game engine on this slide, which is another area that I work in a ton. And then the complication here becomes you can't have these very dense meshes. It needs to run smoothly on a PC or in some cases on a mobile phone. So you have to find a way to decimate down or to remove a lot of those excess faces and polygons and what have you. And I think this also brings up an interesting point at Bell as a whole, that I don't know that 15 years ago that a game designer would have made sense to hire in at Bell, but I can speak from firsthand experience, having a background in game design and serious games, and being at Bell and contributing every day, that I feel like more and more of this mentality and this background of rapid iterative development and agile processes is something that we're bringing in and need to have in the fold for our innovative techniques moving forward. So then looking at how we're pushing VR further into design. So we can go on to the next slide. And essentially what I want to communicate on this one is that what we've looked at thus far with the FCX1 is taking the process of building out a physical cockpit or cabin, whether it be with 2x4s or whatever it might be, that's an outdated technique, and how we brought that into the now with CG and virtual reality and putting you inside of these cockpits. But those that work in the 3D space know that even generating a 3D mesh does take time. So what we're doing at this stage is, instead of going all the way to the 3D mesh in the VR stage, we're able to get rapid iterative development in the sketch phase. So this is actually a 3D sketched model of an aircraft that was just kind of a fun spacecraft that we just had as one of our throwaway projects for fun. And we got this. It came out to essentially all of the turnarounds that you can see at top came out from one model. So you don't have to sketch it 3 or 4 times to get a full turnaround. It's all built in there. And when you have a change, it takes seconds rather than minutes or hours. So the ability to now iterate at step 1 instead of step 2 or 3 is speeding us up even that much further. So on the next slide, you'll see on the left here, Levi's actually in VR giving feedback at the sketch phase. And on the right, there's a designer that's using one of the peripherals that I think is relatively successful called the Logitech VR Ink. That's just another way of drawing and sketching in 3D space. But the ability to immediately collaborate with an end client and an artist or an engineer and a designer, I think is incredible that we're at that phase now. So on this slide, I think an important thing to take away is that the 3D sketch that we can create in any software similar to Gravity Sketch, it will always output some form of 3D. So in general, in previous practices, you would have a 3D artist generate a 3D mesh based on those turnaround sketches, and they would do their best to lay that into a 3D environment and the model on top of it. Whereas in this practice, it actually already gives you the 3D skeleton. And now you're just modeling and laying topology on top of the skeleton. So it speeds up the 3D development cycle in turn as well. So everything is just getting faster and more iterative, and you have a lot more time for feedback before you need to build anything in CG or in an actual part. And Levi, I'll turn it back over to you, I think, at this point.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Cam. So I think when we look at, what's next, how are we going to continue to push this forward? We're doing quite a few things here, and we have been over the last few years with going from a concept like FCX1, and now we're moving into the Bell Nexus and sort of other innovative technologies that will be real products and actually will fly. We were able to leverage those visual and interactive tools to go a little further to increase some of those efficiencies and throughputs and collaborations back and forth between all the technical stuff that Cameron was just describing. And I think it does. It marks a significant shift over the last 3-4 years at Bell and how we think about the approach. It's not always the traditional route of OEM engineering and data. It's also adding in the software design, the gaming engine development, and then the rapid collaboration amongst different teams. So we're doing that not just to increase efficiency, but also to connect with our customers here, as this says. It's to get feedback from our customers in real time is incredibly valuable for us to continue moving things forward and at a much more advanced pace. One example of that is, like many other companies, we have customer advisory boards, folks who currently own or operate Bell aircraft, and their opinions are vital. Their experiences are extremely valuable to us. So we collaborate regularly, especially on new programs. So we'll invite them in. We'll traditionally, in the past, it was a death by PowerPoint. It was come in and talk KPIs and metrics and some goals and objectives, and maybe you'll see some visuals months later down the road or even years later to get to more of a design phase. We did one a while back where the first visit the customer advisory board had on this particular design meeting, we had a full aircraft already designed and mocked up in virtual reality, where we were able to put them in an aircraft and essentially put them on a demo flight. And it really blew them away, because they weren't expecting that until much, much, much later in the process, and never expecting it with virtual reality. So it's another example of how to take things from years of development, especially in that collaboration phase, down to a matter of months or less. And then what we really did to push it to the next level was we had a customer who's also a pilot and an operator, sitting in the seat, and he this particular mission, he was long lining logs or something, and we said, go ahead and tell us what you would do in your situation. And he would look out of the window in VR and say, well, I've got some visibility issues here with the skid gear, because I maybe not be able to see the load or the line. And we said, okay, tell us when to stop. And Cameron was in there real time, and he just scooted the piece over out of the way and said, tell us when your visibility is clear. And that, what we did that for was that as an example of what we do with the pilots as well. We can literally design around the pilot, we can design around the passenger, and it really puts the focus back on the customer experience, which is what we've had with our rebrand and some of our refocus on, not just the safety and the reliability, which again, like I said, are table stakes. That's something Bell's known for, really pushing it to the next level with customer experience and listening to the customer, integrating that back into the design of the aircraft. So that's a big part of our push. Another big thing we've made some advancements on internally is Cameron and I sort of co-founded a internal interactive technology council. And the reason we did that is because, the VR, the AR story inside of Bell has gotten a lot of buzz, and a lot of folks have found efficiencies in other areas. And so we were starting to see a lot of these little groups pop up that are using the technology for their own, program purposes. And we started seeing a lot of benefit to have some collaboration in sort of best practices and info sharing with these other teams. So we stood up this council. We had the full backing of our executive team, who thought it was a great idea as well. The reason for that is to say, Cameron may have solved something in an area for the innovation, engineering, and design, and somebody on the facilities team, has something that could benefit. So we've got folks from engineering, creative, training, facilities, program communications, pretty much every vertical within the company now represented on the Interactive Technology Council, so we can continue to share all of these best practices and lessons learned, and continue to not just cross share, but also cross challenge, and in some cases stand up small project teams. The other benefit, and the last thing I'll say to that, is that we've used that as a platform to invite other, third-party groups. We just spoke with Unity, which is the game engine Cameron was referencing earlier. They're interested in coming in and using us as the voice of a customer for them. So that's incredibly helpful to us, because we can get in on some beta version and testing for sort of the next generation of some of these visual and interactive tools. And so with that, I will open it up to any questions.
You're muted, Dan.
There.
Okay, there we go. Thank you.
There you go.
Gotta love technology. I got so excited about some of the things I forgot to hit my mic button. One of the things you mentioned during the first part of your presentation, Levi, was the fact that you guys are having fun. I have told people over and over and over again that we work in a cool industry and that we should have fun while we're working. And
Exactly.
to me, this was the epitome of things. I mean, do you guys enjoy going to work? Is this a fun process for you?
You know what? It really is, and that's not the internal pitch. It's we get told all the time we have the coolest job. The good news is we actually believe that, and I will say, and I'll give a lot of credit to our leadership at the company. Is we have a CEO with Mitch Snyder who really believes in this process. He's a very visual and visionary type of leader, as is all of our executive team, and then all the way down to the small groups that we manage. Everybody's very visual, very interactive, very encouraging and positive about the process, and that just opens it up to feel really empowered to try things, to push on teams to figure it out, to freedom to fail. That's really important, and it's a lot of fun when you have that level of backing and encouragement from every part of the company, because it really it sort of takes some of the pressure off to meet certain performance metrics and things like that, which we're challenging ourselves to do. But it's also, we challenge ourselves to have fun, and I look forward to the calls I get to have with folks like Cameron and others on the team, because it always turns into a brainstorming session and turns into a lot of fun ideas. I had one similar to that this morning, and I hung up the phone thinking, man, this really is the coolest job, in my opinion, in the company, and maybe in any industry, because we're not only are we challenging to advance, how we design aircraft, but my favorite part is engaging on the customer experience side. I love hearing stories of how people use the product. There's a lot of great, life-saving technology in that. There's a lot of relevant technology now that Bell's working on. And, the good news is being a virtual engagement team, we're already ready to engage virtually like this. We have conferences like this all the time, and we were doing it long before current circumstances, and that keeps it really moving forward and fun and engaging as well.
Well, and one thing you just mentioned again, every time you give part of your presentation, I pick up other elements. The permission to fail. When you're working in VR, it seems like that you have such a time and money saving option here by checking things in advance of the processes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really big important point too there, Dan, is that I spoke earlier to being able to make multiple iterations and try different things. Just like it doesn't cost anything to sketch a bunch of options on paper, but it costs time. With the VR development, when you're in that type of environment, we can build multiple iterations of something and test that across a lot of different panels.
Well, we do have a number of questions, so I can't keep asking all the things I'd like to know. First one is from a Richard Gallagher. Can these designs be imported to commercially available flight simulators so that we can give them a try?
Hey, Cam, do you want to speak to that? Because we are doing something kind of similar.
Yeah, sure. So we have a few different initiatives. One of them is future flight controls. I think the most that I can talk about is that we had it come out at Uber Elevate and at CES last year. And one of the main components of that was taking a model, which just so happened to be the FCX in this case, designing that in this VR space, outputting that into generally the pipeline might be a CATIA or CAD model, which would output somewhere in the FBX OBJ realm. I might be getting way too technical, but generally you can get it into another type of 3D file format that a lot of these engines, especially if you've looked at X-Plane 11, you can actually swap a lot of the components inside just the file hierarchy. And I think there's a lot of possibility there. So I'd be happy to go more in depth or as much as you like in follow-up email or anything like that.
Okay, we might be able to work out a method where we can exchange an email or two here or there, but we'll see how that goes. From Steve Standing, at what point in the design concept do you start to consider maintainability for maintenance personnel?
So from the beginning, honestly, we've got a lot of those folks in the room, and that's really why the collaboration with the engineering team from the very beginning is so important. We're there to think about experience and aesthetics, and in my opinion, the cool part, but a lot of people would say the easy part, is making it pretty. We've got experts in the room every time advocating for the end user, the maintainer, and everything in that process. So a lot of the designs we would come up with aesthetically look great, but may not provide the easiest access to certain parts of the aircraft, or beyond being functional or aerodynamic or physically capable. There are advocates in the room every time thinking about okay, but that's going to be really hard to work on, or it'll be really hard to make replacement parts. So that all comes into the conversations really early on. It's extremely important for us to make sure that the voice from every perspective is considered in the design process.
When you're, this is a kind of a question of mine, but when you're having these collaborative meetings, people don't even need to be in the same room or in the same country for that matter. I'm assuming that there might be a combination of VR and regular video meetings to hold these discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, leveraging the power of the virtual technology, not just in video conference like this, but there are ways to engage in a virtual reality environment from across the globe as well. So that's something we're really looking into. It starts to have its place inside of things like training as well, whether it's maintenance training or anything else, where you can load in whether it's a CAD model or a 3D design in the early phases into a 3D collaborative environment where you can get in and sort of pick things apart, if you will. You can make notes. One of the images you saw me doing there in VR was literally physically marking up, but in a digital world, some changes I would have liked to have seen made on parts of the aircraft. That really starts to have applications in the training side as well, where you can put sort of hands-on tools, so to speak, without having to physically be present with the aircraft. So what we're hoping to see advancements in, and where we're constantly being advocates for, is starting to create some virtual training environments and virtual collaborative environments, whether it's from the engineering or the trainer or the maintainer's perspective.
I will say too, looking at it from an augmented reality perspective, that there's training in the VR world, which works great as well, and AR is making leaps and bounds in real-time practical, whether it's auditing or engineering guidance from remote experts. But even a call as simple as this, with the ability to make 3D like AR kit, AR core annotations in space, are really helping us a lot in that area.
Well, and your discussion brings up a question from actually one of our HAI staff members. Do you think aircraft flight and maintenance training applications would be ready to roll out at the same time or shortly after a design application?
Yeah, so that's where the importance of the digital twin, can come into effect. There is, everything you've got into the design applications and then moving into the engineering CAD data. That can port straight out to the AR applications and create a digital overlay to a physical aircraft. And we've already got some examples we've been showing around, especially some military shows like AUSA and some other places, where we can have that augmented digital aircraft overlaid and walk you through training or maintenance steps. Remove this panel, disconnect that piece, and even with a heads-up display and a picture-in-picture of an actual trainer floating in space, so to speak, but to walk you through that type of thing, which has great implications for field maintenance and things like that as well.
That's funny. We had another question from Richard Gallagher again, basically asking exactly that question. So I appreciate your answering that at the same time. Our next question comes from Ivan Herrera. And will the eVTOL market also benefit from Bell's virtual reality, since they are looking for new technologies for new designs?
Yeah, so in the eVTOL space, the Bell Nexus I referenced early in their presentation is exactly that. That's our eVTOL aircraft, and we are using virtual reality as part of that design pipeline, not only in the design space, but also looking to see if there are ways some of this, whether it's VR, AR, or just simply, interactive touchscreen type of interfaces come into the, environment for the pilot or the passengers, potentially even if it was a rideshare type of experience. So yeah, all of this that we've been talking about is absolutely in the conversation for eVTOL as well. And I think that particular part of the industry is primed and ready, because it's a new and emerging and really fast-paced emerging space that they're really leaning into these other types of pipeline enhancements.
I have a question from a previous webinar participant, Rick Newsom. Welcome back. How does this technology and speed of advance sit with the FAA and traditional certification processes?
So, and that's a great question. This year at CES 2020, back in January, we actually had a member of the FAA, one of the deputy directors, was there in our booth having this exact discussion. He and I got off on a pretty interesting tangent that I asked him that question. How invested is the FAA in these conversations, and when's it going to become more of the set of requirements or preferences for things like certification or training? And they said it's something the FAA is very interested in, that they're looking into, how that might influence some of the regulatory environment as well. So they seemed really open to it. I'm hoping that, we can be some of the influencers that are helping show, how these types of, technological advancements can really pave the way into the FAA space as well.
No, that'll be nice, because if you have an operator who wants to do an aircraft modification, or if you're building an accessory that needs to be have a sort of an STC, the process could be just so much quicker and easier.
Yes.
Question from Ron Alto. Tell us about virtual reality use with your propulsion manufacturers, both turbine engine and electric.
So I don't have any direct experience or contact on those, but I do know we've got some engineering teams that are having those conversations. Cameron, is that something you guys are looking into?
You know, from a VR perspective, I'm sure that there are products out there, but we've actually been looking at it a lot more from a kind of how does the animation pipeline and all of its simulations that it can run that aren't necessarily mathematically based, but are visually meant to tell a story. How can you leverage that when you're looking at propulsion systems and how they're going to be pulling in fluid or air or whatnot? So there is some interesting overlap there again in that similar animation with kind of the CAD background.
Okay. Question from Hudson Smith. I'm not sure you can answer this. Have either of you been involved in the FARA program at Bell? I don't know if you're permitted to talk about that. You did a little bit already, but
yeah, I mean, again, this is something where that's actually a really exciting program, and there's been a lot of stuff that's been publicly talked about recently with FARA. Being down selected is an honor in that program, as well as the FLRAA program. So respectively, internally, it's the Bell V280 for FLRAA and the Bell 360 Invictus for FARA. Yeah, I mean, sitting on the communications team and on the marketing side, obviously I'm involved in all of those. And the good news about that is I know what I can publicly say and what I can't. But it's an exciting program. We're very excited there. Again, similar type of pipeline from where we get involved is thinking about aircraft, aesthetics and functionality and design, and then we leave the engineers to make it work and make it fly.
okay. Our next question actually comes from down under. I'm not about to try to recreate Mark Ogden's Australian accent, but how close is Bell to incorporating artificial intelligence in design?
Oh, hey, Cam, that's your question.
Well, I'm sure this is one of those spaces where I'm not sure what I am not allowed to say, but there is a significant amount of machine learning and AI going into down selecting the correct components with the correct output and cost. So we are feeding into these engines, which actually Unity and Unreal both are implementing a ton of machine learning back-end capabilities right now. So even though they're game engines, they can be leveraged in these really meaningful ways. So the short answer is yes, but that's about all I can probably get into.
Understood and appreciate it. Mark had another question. Does virtual reality offer the opportunity to interact on the web using a VR headset in Australia while discussing with the folks in Texas? We've already talked a little bit about that. So.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a conversation I'm constantly engaging in with different vendors and partners, and where Cameron and I really try to stay on the edge, cutting edge of the technology. I really see implications on not just the design side, but like I mentioned earlier, the training side for that. It's a lot of cost and time involved to come to a physical space to get some of that type of training. Hands-on experience can never be replaced, in my opinion, but there might be some things that can be done earlier in the phases of training and development and design. Absolutely virtual through the web. There's a lot of great platforms out there. I'm not going to stump for any one particular one, but we've reviewed quite a few where you can load CAD-based designs into a virtual cloud environment, and essentially I kind of use the Genie example, but you can poof up a whiteboard next to a CAD design of an engine or a fuselage. You can make notes on the model, much like I was doing in one of the pictures we shared there. That can all live virtually in the cloud. So I can make a design right now, and then Dan, you could get on there tomorrow and see my notes on the aircraft, maybe minor aesthetic notes, and you come in as an engineer and say, yeah, but that's going to impact these lines, and then you can add some additional notes so we can have a true virtual collaboration environment. And those exist today, and we've used those to some degree.
Oh, very cool. From Claire McGarry, can you allow small business supplier visits to your facility to show us these cool things in person? I think we may have Claire contact there at Bell. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And to some degree, I'll say yes. It's we get these requests quite often, so I think it depends on the topic or the type of supplier. But Cameron and I are always looking at that from a cross sharing and learning perspective. What's going on specifically in the VR, AR, game engine design world. So we can host guests on site to kind of share what they're doing, and to some degree we can share what we're up to.
Well, and using virtual reality, they wouldn't even need to visit the facility. So actually, this is kind of an intriguing question. Rick, I think, meant it kind of tongue in cheek. It's Rick Gallagher again, but it does bring up an interesting concept. Do you need volunteer help? I do this for fun now and have the VR gear, but it leads to crowdsourcing, looking for support or ideas from external sources you might not normally have access to.
Yeah, and one thing that I always say there is, ideas come from everywhere. So that's one of those things where I think conversations are encouraged. That's where it'll be interesting to see where the trade show world and event space goes in the future. Hopefully we're all back to meeting in person, at least to some degree soon. But that's where those conversations typically come up, because anybody can walk in the booth and we can have really engaging conversations and share ideas. So that's something that, I always encourage, that, whether folks reach out, via LinkedIn or whether there might be a project that we could someday crowdsource. I think it's a really exciting idea. So yeah, a bit tongue in cheek, but I think it's interesting to say, let's explore different ways to collaborate on, and there might be some open projects we could do that in the future.
That sounds exciting. I imagine you'd end with just a long list of beta tester applicants. So this is from the HAI staff again. What is the most valuable technology that you found most useful crossing over from aircraft design from gaming?
Cameron, you want to take that one?
And then while Cameron's coming on, I'm going to say real quick, as you mentioned a second ago, Levi, HAI does not endorse any product or any particular item that are mentioned during these webinars.
Right.
Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, Cameron.
Say, yeah, no worries at all. So as far as game design, it's interesting because when most people think of game design, you think of the 3D modeling and the coding and all of that, but really game design fundamentally ties back to game theory and player psychology and engagement and understanding how user experiences need to operate in order to get the maximum reward for the player or the user. So I think that there are a lot of practices that have come over from the game design world that are helping out as far as telling a story or engaging with the user or helping to plan out a battlefield. I mean, who knows what it might be. But I will say, as just a small shout out to one of the cooler technology advancements lately in VR that comes from gaming and from engineering is foveated rendering, if anyone has heard of it. But it's essentially pupil tracking and clustering pixels around where your eyes are specifically looking on the screen to make more efficient virtual reality experiences. So that's just a fun aside.
Now, Cam, I know you've worked on games before. I actually had a question from somebody here who'd like to know what games have you worked on? Can you share any of that?
Unfortunately, I cannot. There have been a couple there are two big studios in the DFW area, and I have a clause with both that I cannot speak of.
Understood, and appreciate the fact that you don't want to go places you're not supposed to. I have a comment from John Tukey. Looks like a big boost for maintenance and an increased reliability and dispatch rate. That will definitely increase the ROI. So you've got a big fan there, it sounds like. Final question. Absolutely. It looks like we're going to run out of time here shortly. When do you plan on having a final product with all of this tech you were showing ready to show at a Heli Expo in the future? I know the Nexus is already on the show floor, has been there, but is there anything?
Yeah, so a lot of that comes into things that you've probably seen in the news. You could definitely go to our website and see that. To some degree, some of this was used on the V-280 aircraft, early to midway through the design. That's obviously, like I said earlier, been down selected in the military and flying. FARA won't be far behind as far as that. Like I said, some of this was used on the technology for that. The Nexus is, we've been showing the the concept mock-up at the shows. It was at HAI last year, and potentially would have been this year. And I think that a lot of the things that we're working on now, that's the I would say near future to kind of next level of things, where we've got the APT, which is our autonomous aircraft that does most of the logistics work. There was some of this technology involved in the development of that. It's flying in flight test right now, and hopefully coming to market sooner than later. So there's always something in works. I got a list the other day of 6 new projects that they want us to dive in on as quickly as possible. What I'm excited about is not all of them are holistic aircraft. Some of them are just individual pieces of technology. So they're the engineering teams and the strategy teams are really starting to see the benefit of being able to rapidly digitally prototype some of these designs outside of a CATIA environment to a more what I'll say approachable and accessible level of technology like a VR platform. So that's encouraging, because I think that's going to help us bring things to bear even faster, because we're able to put it in front of more folks quickly, and we can iterate more quickly. And then what that means is you'll start to see it, physically sooner than later. And some of the things as well, it's like I keep going back to the training, because that's something I really believe in is very important, and that's something we could start having great conversations on. And like I said, the fact that the FAA and some other great regulatory areas are interested in it as well, I think that's only going to help to boost that side of the business and really leverage this technology. So as far as starting to see some of the stuff on the floor at HAI, last year we also had the future flight controls that Cameron's worked on. That has been very impressive, I think, and probably one of my favorite projects that we've done, is because that literally is designing and defining future pilot control mechanisms. That's not just a fun video game, even though it is. It's also being used to capture a lot of data and take those pieces back to the team that's designing those future flight controls. So that's very cool, because that's something that's very real, because it's a test platform, but it's been physically in the space, and it was interacted with by thousands of folks. We've got millions of metrics off of that can come back and inform real products. So it's exciting to see the stuff that we've done just a short couple of years really starting to get in the hands of potential users, because that's where it matters. How they experience it and the feedback we can get from our customers is extremely important. So we love putting the tools in the hands of the folks who will use them.
Okay, I apologize. We had a couple more questions come in. Do you both have just another minute or two that we could go over a little bit?
Sure.
From Gene Munson, is the flight envelope and accompanying fatigue spectrum considered in the first cut of visual design or virtual design?
That sounds a very technical question, which is
so. I can speak a little bit to this, and I will say it is not necessarily configured, or from my perspective, it is not necessarily considered at the sketch phase, but it is most definitely considered before a single part is built. It is very much heavily vetted in the CG and the modeling phase.
Okay, another quick question from Ivan Herrera. Will Bell work to get its VR products also certified by EASA in Europe? Many companies will be very interested here in Europe.
Yeah, I think in addition to the FAA and then EASA, as well as Canada and some others, that they're all part of our larger conversations. And it's exciting to see what we're able to bring to shows like the Paris Air Show or the Farnborough and things like that, because EASA is a big part of the conversation as well. So yeah, absolutely excited to start to get some of those things in their hands as well. I was at Paris Air Show just a few years ago showcasing some of our VR, we'll call them experiments at the time, and it was really just showing some high level VR. But yeah, we had some great conversations with EASA at some of those events. So absolutely, those regulatory areas are part of the conversation.
Do you have any advice for aspiring designers who might be listening in?
Yeah, so I'll give my side, and then Cameron can obviously come in from the software and technical side as well. Any aspiring designers, and I think I use the word design very broadly. Be curious, right? That's mine. The only reason I have this cool job, and I know Jim is super jealous of my cool job, but the only reason I have it is because I asked questions. Can I suggest something here? Can I learn more about that? Can I try this? My background is in graphic design, and I have an MBA, which is, it doesn't necessarily, it might get me in the room, but it doesn't necessarily mean I'm any more technically capable, obviously, because it's all about curiosity. It's all about collaboration. It's all about a willingness to try new things. Like I said earlier, it's a willingness to fail, and it's a willingness to raise your hand and say, can I be a part of that? And I don't think that just applies to design, right? That should be across everybody's, way of thinking about their job. And Cameron can probably go to this school, learn that topic, but mine's more of a worldly sense of the view. But
yeah, absolutely. There are a number of schools. I mean, heck, SCAD, a lot of them in California, and DFW. We have SMU and UT Dallas. But it's funny because actually mine is closely tied to your sentiment, Levi, in that I feel like the reason that I ended up where I am today is almost like that movie Yes Man. You just keep saying yes to things, and the whole reason I got into virtual reality was I made the worst film of my life, and it was a 360 film, and it just so happened that was one of the first 360 films that Samsung wanted to try binaural audio and 360 audio on their Milk VR platform. And from there, it just spiraled. You just have to keep doing these opportunities, do the 48-hour engineering film fest, whatever you want to do. But yeah.
Well, Levi, Cam, I certainly appreciate your time today. I think that there's a chance we'd like to have you folks back on in the future to give us updates, because I think the technology that you are talking about now is going to pretty much explode around the world. I think there's a lot of capability, but we sincerely hope that we'll be able to see you at the 2021 Heli Expo in New Orleans this next year. It's in late March, so we're hoping that we'll be able to avoid all the pandemic issues, and we'll be past that. So again, appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Jay. We really appreciate it. It's been great.
Absolutely. For our viewers, follow-up questionnaire is going to be coming shortly. We do appreciate your input. We look for future topics. Would appreciate just a minute or so of your time. Save the date. Next week, our topic is Ask the President. And what we are going to do is bring in some of the aviation magazine publishers, editors, writers, and they will be sitting down with Jim Viola, our president and CEO, and asking him questions about the state of the industry, about pretty much anything that they can think of. We'll also obviously take viewer questions once again. So watch for the link in your email, social media, and Rotor Daily. As always, we'll finish up by asking, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? Please let HAI know what we can do to support the rotorcraft industry, the remotely piloted industry, the VTOL industry, whatever you'd like to call it. Anything that flies vertically, we want to be a part of. So please contact email president@rotor.org with your challenges, your comments, your questions, your ideas. We look forward to hearing from you. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you so much for joining us today.